Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to another SynMax webinar. I'm Sophia LaChapelle, an account manager here at SynMax, and I'm joined by David Bellman, our Vulcan product lead. Today, Bellman will be giving a walkthrough on insights gleaned from Vulcan under construction on 2025 Gen Stack build scenarios, as well as introduce Vulcan Infrastructure Watch, and of course, the use cases for both of these data sets. At the end, we're going to be having a Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions in the chat, and we'll get you answers at the end. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to David.
Thank you, Sophia. So we're going to introduce you to Vulcan. Many of you probably haven't really looked under the hood, and I'm going to open the hood for you guys in regards to what the Vulcan platform has evolved to. This Vulcan you see is 8 months in the works, and it actually goes farther back because it really starts from my own career and how I thought that this would be a transformative, useful product for power modelers or anybody just trying to understand the power industry, particularly given how much builds are being projected. So I've been running power models for at least over a decade or so. And, one of the major inputs is your generation stack. And there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And I'll show you that in this presentation. And I'll show you how Vulcan solves that for you and helps you get to some answers. So what we have here at SynMax is satellite imagery, and we have access to that. And what we're trying to do, and this is the transformative part, is to convert that satellite image to market intelligence. So satellite imaging can produce direct visual confirmation, and we can generate a weekly cadence over a very large geographical footprint. Unlike, sending off a group of people to take pictures or sending some drones. I mean, that works in, one or two cases or something that you need to look at in particular. But when you have to cover the whole United States, that methodology doesn't work. So there are also free satellite imaging companies that you can, get information from, but they are usually delayed and poor resolution. So what we have here is a big differentiator here is the weekly cadence and our ability to understand what's going on from those images. Right now, we are monitoring around 180 gigawatts of power projects. The reason why I have to say around is because this number is continually changing. It changes two ways. Number one, plants eventually become operational, so we're not monitoring them anymore. And number two, the list continues to grow. And this is like, as I said, we came up with this idea. Well, we implemented the idea 8 months ago. The concept of this was in my head for a little bit longer than that, but this is 8 months and we're at 180 gigawatts. All the projects, and we also had feedback from clients. So they didn't want just what we were forecasting or taking pictures of. They wanted a more comprehensive list. So what we have also done is we've pulled in every project in the EIA 816. So right now there's roughly around 234 gigawatts. We then also assigned a unique online date and ranking system. And this is obviously influenced by what we see in Vulcan UC. So Vulcan UC is the 180 gigawatts. And if the 180 gigawatts, if any of those projects are confirmed via satellite imaging, then obviously they get a higher ranking and their delay dates are less impacted. So let me set the stage of what's going on in the market right now. So the EIA plant projections for 2025 is historical. And what I mean by that is there's over 65 gigawatts of new power plant generation capacity that is expected online in 2025. This is in the EIA 860M directly. They have a proposed online date column that you can look at, which By the way, all Vulcan clients have access to all the 860s in Snowflake, in API endpoint, and they can see the evolution of the 860 all the way back to 2015. So you can see that this is the highest level of new builds since 2002 from this chart here. So in 2002, that was the combined cycle renaissance. And what we saw there was a large amount of basically natural gas plants being built. And during that time, that was around 639 projects. Here, we're at roughly the 65 gigawatts of new builds, but it's 880 projects, largely because wind and solar and batteries are much smaller relative to large combined cycle plants. And so the odds of failure, the odds of a project not coming online is much higher than it was then back in 2002. In addition, our clients and subscribers of Vulcan, we do offer and we do report updates that happen. So, for example, just last week, as I was finishing my webinar, the EIA updates 860. So I had to redo everything because the 860 came out, and what they have done for the last couple of months have significantly altered the outlook. Last month, they added 35 gigawatts of new capacity in the November update. This update, they only added 17, so it was a little bit less. But you can see in this particular case, a lot of the projects were back in 2027. So it's less of an impact on the near term, but still they are continually adding and changing the outlook. Let's see. A significant portion, around 83% of the added plants are currently not under construction. So they're just telling you, hey, these plants are coming online. They're proposed. And so you don't really know if they are real because there's no skin in the game yet, or significant skin in the game. 2.8 gigawatts were removed from the data set, and 377 megawatts of new plants turned on operational all of a sudden. So this is what I classify as my ghost plants, meaning that they failed to capture them and then they magically appear as operational. And this does happen. And so that's something to understand, and to understand the uncertainty of the 860M. But on a relatively scale, that's not bad. That's only 377 megawatts that they missed. So that's a positive news, actually. In addition, we update every single week our weekly cadence. So we're taking a satellite photo of all these projects. Last week, we identified land clearing of a 150 megawatt project. Spring Grove Solar 2. The EIA currently has listed them as regulatory approval, not under construction. We send out a weekly research report that kind of updates our clients of what's happening and what's changing. We confirmed 4 projects last week. And eventually, let me define what confirm is. So as I stated, we started 8 months ago. So obviously, a lot of projects were already under construction. We started off with projects that weren't under construction first, because the premise of Vulcan UC initially was to solve the first problem, which is an easy problem to solve, is to say, is a power project under construction? Yes or no? So the binary question. And how we identify construction is the first date would be land clearing. Did they land clear the area? So all projects eventually get land cleared. So is there land clearing? So that's a date column available to our clients. And then the second column for this under construction is the first structure. So now you're getting real skin in the game, and the first structure really drives that online date more than the land clearing. So those are the 2 dates. And obviously, if we started 8 months ago, then many projects have already probably classified as land cleared, and many projects have already classified as for structure. So that's why we're seeing a lot of confirmed projects. So we're just catching up. And eventually, what you'll see is that we'll have less confirmed projects and more identified projects, meaning we're ahead of the curve of identifying a project under construction. We are continually improving the models and understanding and correcting how we manage the satellite imaging. Just recently, there was questions about the offshore wind projects were being pushed out a little farther, and so we delved into it. And what happened was that we had a setting that was different. So you have to have a different setting when you're on the ocean than when you're on land. So we corrected that. And so you'll see in this presentation that there are some offshores that are confirmed, and they're likely going to be online this year. There's a picture of the Vineyard Wind 1, and you can see there, this is what we're seeing on the ocean. You can actually see the structures. So our current coverage is around roughly 70%. It was actually close to 80% until they added in November and December, almost 40, 50 gigawatts. So we're catching up. We are targeting 80% coverage. But like I said, it's kind of dynamic because things are going in and out. We are continually adding coverage every week. Our coverage is very good in ERCOT and MISO, and we will get California and PJM up. Clients can also submit and request for particular projects, and we will make sure that they get into the queue. Now, the nuance is that we don't monitor really small projects because you really can't see those projects. So such as like a 10 megawatt battery project. In fact, I think our battery cutoff is around 100 megawatts. So that's why we'll never be 100% coverage. But in terms of UC, now in terms of online dates and rate rankings, we do have a process to cover all those. And I think I'll talk about that in a little bit. So if we look at what we're seeing here, once again, this is kind of setting the stage of what's going on. So the EIA 860 build profile is that first chart, and you can see it's heavily weighted towards December. The important number also is to look at the average monthly build. They're averaging over 5.5 gigawatts, and that's exceeding the 5-year average. So the last 5 years, we've been averaging around 3.2 gigawatts. And just for perspective, 2024 was around 4 gigawatts. So if they are achieving this target in 2025, it will be quite impressive and unprecedented of recent. Vulcan UC is currently covering 43 gigawatts of the projected 2025 projects. So that's roughly around 70% coverage. What we're seeing is 14.2 gigawatts of unconfirmed, meaning they show no sign of activity. The confirmed and identified construction is roughly around 28 gigawatts that we have confirmed, while additionally 2.5 gigawatts have been identified under construction and EIA is not under construction. We then created this, like I said, using the data that we have, incorporating the satellite imaging. We created different versions of build outs based on that. So the Vulcan V2 chart is what I'm showing there below. It provides a smoother build, and it produces a profile averaging around 4.1 gigawatts, so slightly higher than 2024. So let's talk about these scenarios and how we're coming up with them. So our adjustments are based on ranking algorithms of each project. So there's multiple ways we rank them. So number one, easy one to think about is who's the developer? Has a developer developed this project before? What are their success rates? So that impacts the rankings. What state is this project in? That impacts the ranking. What technology you're doing? How long has a project been in the queue? So all those things impact the ranking, and then we produce this result. We started off trying to create really a more conservative to create the the band between the EIA optimistic view to this lower view. Over the past few 5 years, as I said, the build has been roughly 3.2 gigawatts, and you can see that that the V1 is that lower range of slightly under 3 gigawatts. Now, the clients have full access to this, so you can see, and this is how, as a power modeler, I built it so that you can take the EIA plant ID and gen ID and concatenate them, or I think we already have a concatenation column called SynMax ID, and then you can map it to your database that you're currently running in your power models and do a quick VLOOKUP and change that date column to create and run a scenario really quickly. So you can create a scenario into your power database, then run it into your power models so that you can have a V1 and a V2 view of the supply stack, plus your own internal one. And then maybe you can even do the EIA because you do have access to the EIA on this too. So you can create really quickly and in your power models simulations of these different build profiles. And you can create your own build profiles too, and we can talk about that in a bit here. Yeah, let me address that. So you'll see here that the title of each graph is 20% removed. So it's important to note that, so what I did, I went back in history, and you have access to this too. If you look at the 860 and their projections per projects, like you could say, okay, they projected in 2023 X amount of projects, X amount of megawatts. And you can see that the success rate from 2022 to, I mean, like, I don't know, 5, 10 years, you can see that they typically are roughly around 20%, meaning that there's a lot of over forecasting in it. Like developers are submitting projects that they'll never develop. They just, trying to get something in the queue or something like that. And so it's roughly around 20%. That's why I use the 20% cutoff. So the question is, how do you generate which of these projects are part of that 20%? And that's what drove me to create that ranking. So what you can do is if you sort it by rank, you can add up all the way from lowest to highest until you hit that 20% or whatever number that you want, right? If you want to remove 10%, you pick the ranking that hits you 10%, and that's how you quickly remove those projects. So, like I said, we've designed this really for you to be able to create scenarios, or you can just use our default ones. But at least there's a logical path on how you remove plants. I want to talk to you about what's driving the uncertainty in even the 860M. So this is kind of random. I picked a plant, and in this particular plant, we picked Atlanta Farms Solar in Pickaway County, Ohio. This is a 200 megawatt solar plant. It's currently being projected to come online this January. Obviously, January is about to end, but it was originally showed up in the 860 in October of 2021. So this is a table of month of date is the 860M release. So in October of 2021, this plant showed up, and it had a planned operation date of September 2023. It also had a status of planned for installation, but regulatory approvals not initiated. Okay. And so this setup went on and on and on. If we were satellite imaging it, we would have noticed that the land started getting cleared in February of 2023. So I put the arrow February 2023. You can see that the EIA still left the status September, the planned operating date of September 2023, and the same status, even though the land was cleared, and even though we know, and we went back in history and looked at projects, that the fastest solar build that you can probably think of is probably around 7 months, right? And so it would be near to impossible to have you're sitting in February and you're still keeping the planned operating online date as September 2023, right? So that's in itself a red flag. Then, as we move into time, you can see they actually eventually changed the planned operating date in June of realization is look, made much progress. They're built on time. You can see that the status still remained planned for installation. We saw a first structure on December of 2023. Okay. Yet they still kept the build on April 2024 and they still had the status as planned. Okay. So this is very important is that these columns that we use as modelers, because I was using these things as modelers. Once again, I didn't have the satellite imaging to know that this uncertainty exists, but we do now know that from the satellite images. And so just to let you know, our earliest online date at that time would have calculated, basically July of 2024, because that was the first structure started in December 2023. So that's 7 months. Our latest online date came out to be, and this is basically looking at, how long the project's averagely delayed. I mean, there's some long, long delays. So you can go out all the way to 2027. Our V2 model said, hey, it should come on this month. Our V1 model says April. And you can see our ranking there. It's 5.9%. And I think the 20% threshold, I think is 5.8. And the max ranking is 6.247. So this project's going to come on. It's just because we see the construction, we see the first structure. And currently, we obviously see the panels too, by the way. But at that time, it then produces a very high ranking. And so the likely of it coming online is just a matter of when then. So let's examine the summer build, okay? So Vulcan UC initially was designed for a black and white answer, meaning if we take a satellite photo of something and it hasn't started construction, the one thing that we can know for certain is its earliest online date potential, right? So once again, I go back to the example. If we took a satellite photo now and it's not under construction, we can assume, let's say next week they start construction, but the earliest project, let's say 7 months from now, that means it cannot come on before June, right? So that's like a binary result there. So in this binary result here, what I'm trying to show here in the first bullet point is at least 6.1 gigawatts of capacity is unlikely, and unlikely meaning like 99%, that they're not going to meet the summer build schedule as reported in the EIA. And I can say that with certainty because I have a satellite photo of these projects, and they have not even land cleared in many cases. Okay. So there is an impact of construction delays, projects with planned online dates before the summer that have not yet commenced construction are highly unlikely to be operational. So if we focus on the earliest online date, the second graph I made is basically a table of where it can be the earliest. And you can see August, December. August is the big winner, meaning that they've got so delayed that the odds of them even being August is highly suspect because that's like the fastest. So what's the odds of a project being the fastest? Not too high, but at least it's not 100%, 99% certainty that they're not going to make it. So considering a broad set of factors beyond just the UC. So now we're going into the calculations of the rankings and the delayed project probabilities. So we're moving from the black and white binary guaranteed numbers, the 6.1 gigawatts, to okay, but we also know that the odds of them being early and the odds of them being late and the rankings, that they're going to be more than just the 6.1 gigawatts. And so far in the V2, we are at 8 gigawatts. So an additional 2 gigawatts we say will not make the summertime. And ERCOT faces the greatest amount, but they also have the most projects. So it kind of makes sense there. So here's a summary of the table for the summer. So when you ask about comparing summer on summer from 2024 to summer of 2025, you also have to add in all the projects that came online since September 1st, right? Because they're going to show up in the next summer. So what you see there is 21.2 gigawatts of operating capacity that came online since September 1st, and that came directly from the EIA. Then you look at the build out projected, and you can see there that the EIA has a projection of 40.5 gigawatts. And then you can see our version V2 and V1, then the 20% removed. Now, the 20% removed, you can see, is very small. And the reason why it's very small is because the lower ranking projects are typically farther out. So that's part of the algorithm of the ranking. So you can see that the near-term projects have more oomph and more reality. And of course, the Vulcan UC has confirmed many of these projects. So that's why the 20% removed is really a smaller number. Okay. When we look at 2025 as a whole, right? So we're, and this is including the broader set of factors beyond just Vulcan UC, where we're close to 12 gigawatts of capacity is likely to miss the 2025 online date. Some of these projects are in the summertime are still going to show up, right? Because as I showed in that graph, we had some August earliest online date. So some of those August early on online dates will show up as potential for the year of 2025. And once again, solar faces the greatest amount of delays. Solar projects continue to exhibit the most, with over 7 gigawatts of solar capacity projected to miss the original online dates. And this is the summary of the 2025 build comparisons. The EIA, as noted, is averaging around 5.4 gigawatts per month. And you can see Vulcan V1 is closer to the historical 3 gigawatts. V2 is closer to the 2024 numbers of 4.1. And then if you do the 20% removal, you can see it does knock down a little bit too. Once again, 2025 builds are probably not they are not as large in that bottom 20% of the ranking of the projects. So as the projected online dates move further into the future, the likelihood of delays increases, resulting in lower Vulcan rankings and a widening gap between the EIA estimates and Vulcan predictions. Conversely, longer-term online date projections are inherently more uncertain, allowing for a greater potential to still meet those targets. This dynamic contributes to the widening divergence between the Vulcan V2 and the V1 estimates. So that concludes the summary of the Vulcan UC and what we see in the 2025 builds. We want to talk about an additional feature that is being added. Once again, this comes from our brainstorm of understanding that what we have is a lot of access to satellite imaging, and all we need to do is to figure ways to make it useful and practical for people to use it in their analytics. And so one of the things that we also said is what we can do is for existing infrastructure. So Vulcan UC is focused on planned power projects, and it's a weekly cadence because you got to monitor this thing and see when exactly they're starting. And so this is a not existing project. Whereas in a Vulcan IW, we want to focus on existing. Now, obviously, an existing plant's not really going to change unless something is happening. So what we're going to start doing, and what our clients will start seeing, is releases of infrastructures as a result of weather events or human activities. So we did two studies of recently. One of them was we published, which was the Ukraine war analysis of infrastructure. So obviously, in this particular case, it was a man-made event, not a weather event. Um, Here you can see in the report, I think it's like 40-page PDF file. It's free because we wanted to demonstrate to people the ability of Vulcan IW. You should go download it. It's very interesting. I had a hypothesis coming into it, and it was more impressive than even my hypothesis. My initial hypothesis was that, hey, I don't think the power plants are that much destroyed. I don't think that Putin really wants to win the war at all costs, right? If you want to win the war at all costs, you typically, blow up infrastructure. So we examined 51 plants before and after the war, and only two plants showed visible damage. All operation power plants appear visually intact. Out of the 21 mothball plants, which they deemed mothball largely because they were attacked and they were deemed to not be fixed or recoverable. So there was like around 21 of those plants. Only two of those actually showed visual physical damage. And in fact, six mothball plants, and once again, this out of coincidence, I guess, at some level, when we took a satellite photo of them, we actually saw steam coming from the plant indicating operations. So these were mothball plants, meaning the plants are not supposed to be running, but they look to be running. And we have pictures. An example is there right there at the bottom. And you can see some of the other ones actually even had more steam than that. So the good news is, given most of the power plants do not show visible damage, the power issues are likely from the transmission and distribution aspect of things, which are less costly and more timely to be able to get fixed. So, and then we also looked at the historical analysis of consumption. It's also in the report, and you can see the load consumption has been declining even before the war. I think it started in 2012, and so they really do have ample capacity to meet load, and so that's good news. The other report, which should be coming out next week, is the Hurricane Milton analysis. And, obviously this is a little late. But we wanted to demonstrate so that the next hurricane, we will be more proactive and be able to show our clients exactly what has happened. But we did learn quite a bit from this. And once again, my hypothesis was directionally that solar is robust, but I did not expect it to be this robust. So we examined 74 plants before and after Hurricane Milton, and only two plants were damaged. Those two plants are directly tied to tornadoes. Hurricane Milton generated an unprecedented 46 tornadoes in Florida from October 8th to 9th, marking the state's most prolific tornado outbreak since 1954. However, and also if you think about it, since 1954, there wasn't this many solar plants. Only two were still damaged. So basically, only 3% of solar generation was damaged, and those two plants continue to also generate. So we can show that, and you'll see in the report, the EIA 923 November of these plants still produced, even though the pictures of the panels are still damaged. I mean, we still have near-term pictures right now in January showing they're still damaged, but yet they're still producing power. So it would actually claim that solar is quite robust. I mean, obviously, when the sun doesn't shine, that's its own issue. But in terms of being able to sustain storms and being able to partially operate, it certainly shows its resiliency. I want to close out with, in 8 months' time, we have now an API that clients can access all of this information. It's an enormous amount of information. From once again, I designed it so if I was the client, I would like this information and I can use this quickly and easily for my models. So we have an API that will be able to give you the project grants, the plan ID, the gen ID, the online dates, the various online dates that you can use, and the rankings, and what EIA was saying, what our status is, what's their status. All this is available. You can create wonderful images and be able to extract knowledge quickly and easily to run models quite efficiently. We are definitely targeting to be worth more than in terms of the value generated from this is significantly worth more than what we currently are charging. Once again, we're 8 months into this and we're already at this level. We have a Snowflake Tableau integration. This is how I worked on everything in able to produce these results for you. We do have a web UI. You can log on. You can see all the photo satellite images. We have a timeline of all the satellite images. They're all available to our clients. And with that, that is the end of the presentation.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started with some questions. One that I think is pretty timely is, how does DeepSeek impact all of this?
Well, DeepSeek should impact, well, what should we start? Should we start really macro, or has it impact SynMax in itself? So it will probably impact SynMax itself. But if we start really macro, let's just talk about markets, right? One of the projects that we are working on is data center analysis. So eventually our clients can also access the same thing they do for power plants, but for data centers. So we are working on that and obtaining that metric. So we'll work on trying to do a weekly cadence of data centers and tell you where the operational statuses are on these proposed plants. Now, if DeepSeek is truly correct, there will be a temporary dislocation. And I use the word temporary because I do believe in the end, because of the increased efficiencies, you find more use cases to use AI, to use inferences in ideas that you would never do because you were gridlocked into thinking that your capacity, your throughput was only X amount, but now it could be X squared. So now you can have it do a lot more. So, but on the near-term basis, a lot of people probably are questioning their purchases. And so now I think many probably can't back out without declaring bankruptcy. So I don't know if they want to do that. So that's where I think that there's going to be an excess. If DeepSeek is right, there'll be an excess of compute initially, but over time, it should come back into a normal growth projection. In terms of SynMax, so we go micro and how will DeepSeek impact SynMax, I think we can obviously compute and process more. So that will be, once again, our use cases and our usability of AI will also improve. And that's how we help the demand fix itself.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on nuclear / SMRs here? Will new tech like fusion get rid of these older techs? Is it not needed now with DeepSeek?
Wow. Okay. I didn't know I was going to go so macro all of a sudden. I've talked about SMRs and at the Nodal conference, I spoke about that. And then at the podcast I did yesterday, was it, or 2 days ago? Again, time's flying. The SMR, I think, is going to be a very niche application. And because it's niche, it actually stops it, because the whole concept of SMR is to be able to roll out massive amounts in order to get the cost down. But it's a really big chicken and egg, because if you can't get the mass, then you can't get the cost down, but you can't prove that you can get the cost down. And my biggest problem with SMR is the first word, which is small. So a lot of fixed costs are there in power generation, and particularly for nuclear generation, from your lawyer costs, your permitting costs, your legal costs, your modeling costs. all those things are the same, whether it's 5 megawatts or 5 gigawatts. And so that's why you go big, right? You go big because you're diminishing that fixed cost component. So the SMR thing is, I think fusion is more likely than SMR. So think of that in perspective. I'm optimistic. I mean, a lot of new things with fusion and basically how you can control it, the heat, the magnetic stuff, but that's still probably a decade out.
Awesome. Kind of switching gears a little bit. I was curious if your team has a plan to account for ISO FERC filings and the new administration's allowance for queue jumping for thermal resources tied to reliability and growth. There's a good chance we may see a large amount of combined cycle generation appear in short order with little notice. Did you have any thoughts if it could be modified
Sure,
to include some of these new thermal resources?
sure. So there's a chicken and egg here too, or so if you're power modeling, what you typically want to model is what's on the grid, right? So you have power demand and you have generation resources that fill that grid. But imagine if all of a sudden that load is not on the grid and that generation is not part of the grid. So I think the fastest online fossil fuel units will likely be behind the meter. And so that makes a problem in the modeling aspect of it. So if it's serving a load and you don't put the load on the grid and it's generating itself, does it matter as a power modeler? It's a good question if they ponder that. Speed. There was a lot to that question. What else did I want to cover about that question? What was the beginning part? It was a long question. That's why I got lost.
Yeah. ISO FERC filings and
Okay, yeah,
queue
so
jumping.
good news, good news. So the good news is that we are working with a particular ISO right now. And so we do and have seen that they actually have a lot more projects in the EI 860. And we are looking at for us, we are helping the ISO so that they would have a better reliability picture. And so when they're running their assessments, that they will have a better one. So we do plan to serve all the ISOs. And so we do plan to incorporate that data. But in theory, the EI 860 will also have some of that, and we hope that the EI 860 and the EIA in itself continually gets better. I mean, it's good for the industry.
Have you run across or considered projects that could be starting construction that are in interconnection queues, but not in the EIA 860?
Once again, that is answered from the previous question because we are working with ISOs and we're looking at their data. We just have to find a happy medium between public and private data because right now we're just assuming all the ISO data that we're currently talking with the ISO is private. And so we will work with that and figure out at what point it can become public. At the same time, clients have the capability of submitting a project to us. Now, obviously, it could go out to the whole group aspect, but we're not going to announce if client A tells us, "Hey, could you monitor plant B?" and we put plant B in the queue and we monitor it, it'll show up in the database. We're not announcing that client A told us to put plant B in there, right? It will show up in the data. Now, we do offer, if you want your own private database and your own view, we can do that, but it will come with a decent cost. So that is possible if you guys are out there wanting to have your own satellite database and your own projects, we can offer that. But like I said, if you ask for plant B and I do it and I put plant B in the I'll tell you I put plant B in the system. I mean, we're talking thousands of rows here, and no one's really going to capture that plant B unless they're looking for it.
How do you monitor the actual outputs for each energy facility?
Okay, so output, we're not doing output yet. Okay, and why I use the word yet because I have many ideas in my head. But right now, we want to answer the basic question. In fact, we're one step above basic, right? Because initially, when I started this project, I said, "Oh, let's just do this binary thing. Let's just stay with that. Let's just tell people if a project's on under construction or not, and then basically say, can it meet the earliest online date? Yeah, what is that earliest online date? Those are with 100% certainty numbers, meaning that there's no black box. There's no me coming up with something that you have to depend on. I know I show you a picture and I tell you earliest online date, and it's rational, and that's very binary. And then clients said, well, we want more. We want all these other projects. And since you have access to all this data, why don't you create a ranking system? Why don't you create new online profiles? Because the obviously the EIA online profiles is just not right. You can see that big December spike. And um so that's on our path. Remember, this is 8 months on our path. Now, people want to know if something is on, right? You want to know when it's actually on the grid and we're generating. So I have ideas, and we had this one idea that we were going to implement, and this was it was going to be Vulcan on, right, essentially, for solar as an example. What we were going to do is actually use infrared and look at the solar banks and see if they were heating up. The issue is that that satellite got blown up, or it didn't work, and so they have to relaunch. They should be launching in Q1 of this year. So if that satellite comes back on, we can experiment with Vulcan for at least identifying when a plant comes online. Obviously, fossil fuels, we can just look for a plume. Um, yeah. So we are on the path to create more value for our clients. So it's a good time to sign up for Vulcan, and you can drive the path.
Um, are you guys doing this for LNG plants yet?
Yes. In this presentation, I didn't cover this, but the first infrastructure that we did that was beyond power plants is LNG. So we have a monitoring of all the LNG terminals in the U.S., and we actually did just 2 weeks ago did the Qatar one in the North Field, and so we did a report on that. Clients get access to this. The North Field Qatar plant looks to be on schedule. I think they should be able to start producing something by the end of this year, in fact. Yeah.
And can you explain about how the signals from the satellite are generated and how reliable they are for indicating site status?
Yes. So it's a visual confirmation. There's no really signal per se. I mean, we do have training tools. But we always visually look at it as humans right now, because I think we're at 800. So that's very manageable on a weekly cadence so far. But obviously we start doing global. We are looking to doing global projects beyond just the US. The only reason, well, multiple reasons to start off with the US, but a big one is the EIA, right? So the EIA has a list, and we were able to look historically and be able to understand the success rates and stuff like that. So we wish the rest of the world had an EIA, the European EIA, the Asian EIA version. We all wish. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of branching out beyond where we are, but we can and will focus on all infrastructure, and our clients can and guide us to what they want.
Well, since you're talking about EIA data, we have a question. Does Vulcan use IEA data sets or primarily slash solely EIA?
Well, we also use the GEMS wiki. That's actually how we got all the Ukraine GPS stuff. They come out with, for better or for worse, they have an annual reporting of power projects and infrastructure. So maybe the benefit of Vulcan increases because they're only an annual product, whereas at least EIA is monthly. And so you can't really get an update on status, but we can give you that update. We just don't get a feedback on our update, right? We have every satellite image. You can look at it yourself. All clients have full access to it. So you can see with your own two eyes what we declare as land clear, what we declare as first structure. And obviously, if you beg to differ that that's not a land clear or that's not a first structure, you have to call us and we can talk about it and work through that.
We have one here kind of spiraling off the LNG question. What's the highest latitude your satellite data covers? I.e., can you get to the Russian Arctic LNG plants?
I will have to get back to you with that. That is not my forte. My forte is interpreting data and producing analytical results. But would table that and make sure that we can find out who that question was from, and we'll let them know.
Yeah, of course. Um, can you talk more about wind turbines? What trends are you seeing in the satellite data and whether you have a macro concern? How can SynMax track this?
So yeah, so very important point about wind. So wind requires so much geographical footprint. So there is a little bit of luck involved with us monitoring wind, meaning that maybe if they start at the very corner of a wind project and then work its way down, we may not see it until we're midway through the construction phase. That has happened. Um, but that's just part of the risk of identifying under construction or not, or land clearing. So wind is probably the most, one of those things. And obviously we had that ocean issue, which we discovered like a week ago. So that made me change the whole presentation too, because we updated. But the good news is most of our growing pains, I think, are dwindling down. So once again, I really say that this is a good time to sign up for Vulcan right now. Are you on
Sorry,
mute?
have you considered new space alternatives to get additional insights like thermal or hyperspectral?
Yeah, once again, we were doing the IR is definitely something I'm looking forward to. The satellite, just the one that we were going to use, I don't know if it blew up or just went, um, just what was that term when something just went broke? So, but anyway, yeah, we are always looking to be better.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that looks like that is all the questions that we have in right now. David has the email there on the screen if anyone has any more and want to reach out. But we thank you for attending this webinar this morning. Have a nice day, everyone.